Okay, hello everybody. We're actually super close to the end of the book. That's just how much we have left. I can't believe it's already almost over, but that's okay. We have more books to read after this. We always have more books. So this is chapter 27 called Another Crossing. In chapter 26, they had a conversation with a star constellation named Gwiri, and Gwiri taught them the Song of Leaping. And they are about to run into their old friend Shim because, shockingly enough, that little bush pile that Bumblebee was resting on was not just a little old bush pile. It was actually Shim sleeping. So, here's chapter 27 called Another Crossing. And no, Emma, it's not Jim, it's Shim. S-H-I-M, Shim. Another Crossing. The pile of brush lurched suddenly to the side, hurling the sleeping Bumblebee into the air. His bells clanged like a blacksmith, and his shriek, easily heard above the rumbling of the valley below, joined with the surprised shouts of Rhea and me. Spraying branches, leaves, and fern fronds across the grassy notch, the pile of leaves bent, twisted, and sat up. Two enormous arms stretched to either side, while a pair of hairy feet kicked free from the debris. A head lifted, showing wide pink eyes and a cavernous mouth that opened like a yawn. Just below the eyes, a gargantuan nose bulged like a swollen potato. "Shim!" cried Rhea and I at once. Finishing his yawn, the giant looked down on us in surprise. He rubbed his eyes, then looked again. "Is you a dream, or is you real?" "We're real," I declared. Shrim scrunched his nose doubtfully. "Really, truly, honestly?" "Really, truly, honestly." Rhea stepped forward and patted one of his feet, which towered over her. "It's good to see you again, Shim." With a great smile, the giant reached out with one arm and gently scooped us into the palm of his hand. "I thinks I is still dreaming, but it's you, the truly you." He brought his nose a little closer and took a sniff. "You smells like bread. Goodly bread." I nodded. "Ambrosia, like we had that night at Carepree. Do you remember, good Shim?" "I wish we'd brought you some, but we're in a hurry, you see. A great hurry." The immense nose scrunched again. "Is you still full of madness?" "You could put it that way." "Ever since the day we firstly meets, you was full of madness." The giant rocked with a thunderous laugh, swaying on the grassy knoll, shaking loose some rocks that bounced down into the valley. "That day you almost gets stinged by thousands of bees. And you were nothing but a blundering ball of honey." Rhea, who had managed to rise to her knees in a fleshy palm, joined in. "You were so small, I was sure you were a dwarf." Shim's pink eyes glowed with pride. "I is small no more." Another tumultuous crash from the valley filled the air, rocking the ridge. Even Shim's mighty arm swayed like a tree in a gale. Rhea and I clung to his thumb for support. His expression turned serious. "They is working hard down there. I is supposed to bring the branches, for cooking's the supper." He looked suddenly sheepish. "I only wanted to rolls in the branches and takes a little nap. A briefly little nap." "We're glad you did," I replied. "We need your help." A long, painful nose came from the loose branches at the far end of the notch. Before I could say anything, Shim reached over with his free hand and lifted out Bumblebee by his heavy cloak. Draped with the drooping ferns and broken branches, frowning with his whole face down to his layered chins, the gloomy jester looked half alive at best. Rhea watched the dangling jester with concern. "Did you see him go flying when Shim woke up?" I gave her a sardonic grin. Maybe that was the leap that Gwiri was talking about. "Oh," groaned Bumblebee, holding his head. "My head feels like a rock that just bounced down one of these cliffs. I must have rolled off that pile of—" All at once, he realized that he was being carried over the knoll by a giant. He struggled, swatting at the huge thumb that was hooked under his cloak. "Help! I'm about to be eaten." Shim grunted and shook his head at the bedraggled jester. You isn't very tasty, that's easily to see. I wouldn't put you in my mouth for anythings. I waved at Bumblebee. Don't worry, this giant's a friend of ours. Bumblebee, swaying before Shim's nose, continued to flail wildly. Such a tragedy, he wailed. All my humor and wisdom lost forever down a giant's gullet. Shim dropped him into the palm of his other hand. Bumblebee landed in the heap beside Rhea and me. He struggled to stand, took a swing at Shim's nose, tripped, and fell flat on his face again. An enormous grin spread across Shim's face. At leastly he's funny. Bumblebee, who was trying to stand again, froze. Do you mean that? Funny enough to make you laugh? Not that funny, boomed Shim, his voice so powerful it almost blew us all over the edge of his palm. Just enough to makes me grin. The jester finally stood, trying to keep his balance while squaring his shoulder and straightening his cloak. Good giant, you are more intelligent than I had thought at first. He bowed awkwardly. I am Bumblebee the Mirthful, jester to nobody. I ignored his glare and spoke to Shim. As I was saying, we need your help. We need to get to the lair of the sleeping dragon, the one Tuatha battled long ago. It's somewhere across the water. The giant's grin faded as the rising wind howled across the cliffs. You must be kidding me. I fear he's not, said Bumblebee. His usual glumness returned. You might as well eat us all now, before the dragon does. If it's really a sleeping dragon, asked Rhea, just how dangerous can it be? Verily, thundered Shim, his whole frame swaying like a great tree in a storm. For starters, the dragon is still hungrily, even while it sleeps. For enders, it could wakes up any time. He paused, tilting his huge head in thought. Nobody's know when Tuatha's sleeping spell will wears off and the dragon will wakes up, although the legends say it will happen on the darkest day in the life of Finkyra. Bumblebee sighed. Sounds like a typical day for me. Hush. I gazed up at Shim. Will you take us there right away? All right, but it is madness. Certainly, definitely, absolutely. Scanning the knoll strewn with brush, he bit his great lip. But firstly, I need to bring these branches down to Varigol. Please no, I begged. I scanned the afternoon sky, afraid to see the rising sliver of the moon. Every minute counts now, Shim. I'm almost out of time. I supposes I is already late with these pokingly branches. Then you'll do it? Shim replied by standing and taking a single enormous stride across the spine of the ridge. Rocked by the jolt, we fell together in a jumble on his palm. Untangling ourselves was made more difficult by the giant's bouncing gait, but we finally succeeded, except for Bumblebee, whose cloak had wrapped itself tightly around his head and shoulders. As he struggled to free himself, the bells were merrily silent under the cloak. Rhea and I, meanwhile, crawled to the edge of Shim's palm and peered through the gaps in his fingers. Wind rushed past our faces as we watched the landscape transform. So great were Shim's strides that the chanting of the giants and the rumbling of their labors soon faded away completely. He stepped over boulder fields as if they were mere clusters of pebbles, crushing rock ledges with his feet. Mountain passes that would have taken us days to scale he climbed in a few minutes. We traversed yawning crevices with the ease of a rabbit hopping over a stick. Before long, the terrain began to flatten. Hillsides of trees replaced the snow-draped ridges, while the valleys widened into broad meadows painted with purple and yellow flowers. Shim paused only once to blow on the boughs of an apple tree, showering us with fruit. Unlike Bumblebee, who hadn't yet regained his appetite, Rhea and I ate the apples avidly. Shim sped along, so fast that I had only barely noticed the expanding sweep of blue ahead when his heavy foot splashed into water. In another moment he was wading through a channel, surrounded by a flock of screeching gulls. His voice boomed, frightening the birds. I remember when you carries me across a ragingly river. Right, I shouted to be heard above the wind and screeching gulls. The crossing was so rough I had to carry you on my shoulder. That would be hardly now. Certainly, definitely, absolutely. Turning my second sight across the channel, I noticed a line of dark hills, as rugged as a row of jagged teeth on the horizon. The Lost Lands. Well, I remembered the words Carefree had used to describe that territory. Uncharted and unexplored. With a deadly dragon sleeping somewhere in those hills, I didn't wonder why. Instinctively, I reached for the hilt of my sword. Minutes later, Shim stepped out of the channel, his hairy feet slapping on the shore. He set us down on a wide bank of flat rocks. No flowers, nor even grasses sprouted here. Even the glowing light of approaching sunset brought no softer hues to the land. Only a shiny black ash coated the rocks, stretching to the hillsides far inland. The air reeked of charcoal, like an abandoned fire pit. I realized that this entire coastline and everything that once grew on it must have been scorched by powerful flames. Even the rocks themselves looked cracked and buckled, seared by repeated blasts of extreme heat. Then, scanning the rugged hills, I found the source. A thin curl of smoke rising from a hollow not far inland. "That's where we're going," I declared. Shim bent his worried face so low that his chin almost touched the top of my staff. "Is you certainly—" "Nobody goes to visit a dragon on purposely." "I do." "You is foolishly, you know that?" "I know that. Too well, believe me." The giant's moist eyes blinked. "Then good luck. I misses you, and you too, sweetly Rhea. I hopes to make another crossing with you one daily." Bumblewee's bells jangled as he wagged his head. "With the dragon's lair just over there, we probably don't have another day." With that, Shim straightened his back. He gazed down on us for another moment, then turned and strode straight into the channel. The setting sun, streaking the western sky with lavender and pink, outlined his massive shoulders and head. High above, a pale crescent moon lifted into the sky. Okay, so that is chapter 27, my friends. Tomorrow we will read chapter 28, and after that there's only 5 or 6 more chapters. So come join me tomorrow, and we shall read chapter 28. Have a wonderful night. Thank you for joining me.